Hello everyone, it's Daniel from TechMind Factory and welcome to this video called Modern Identity Platform powered by Microsoft Azure Cloud. When it comes to managing identities, it's like a huge topic. And obviously in this video we are going to talk about Azure Cloud and Azure Cloud services that we can use to build modern identity platform. But in general, this is hard topic, this is huge topic, and I thought that it will be really helpful for many of you to provide some insights, some information about building modern identity platform for customer scenarios. So what I have on mind is the fact that when we talk about corporate scenarios, most of us think about using Azure Active Directory, yeah? So if we own organization or if there is organization, this organization has Azure Active Directory, employees' accounts are created there, and employees can use their corporate emails to sign in to the platform like Office 365 or sign in to one of the applications connected with this organization's Azure Active Directory, and then they can access those applications, those resources. And in the end, there is it's clear scenario. Yes, when it comes to corporate scenarios, probably we are going to use Azure Active Directory. But when it comes to customer scenarios, like B2C scenarios, so business to customer, the situation is not so obvious. And why it's not so obvious? Let me put some examples here before we start. So we are on the same page. So generally speaking, when we talk about customer scenarios, first of all, there is this challenge related to managing user identities and providing different ways for those customers, those B2C users, to authenticate. So of course, the typical scenario is where such user, such customer can use local accounts, so email and password, create account in our application, whatever, and then access this application, this resource using local account. But there are obviously those other scenarios like sign in with Facebook, sign in with Twitter, or even more, there can be scenarios where even if this is the platform or application that is dedicated to customers, so for B2C scenarios, maybe we would like to also use our corporate accounts that are stored and managed by our corporate Azure AD. So in this case, as I mentioned, there can be really multiple scenarios, and also you can add one more scenario here. So for instance, you can enable those B2C users the option to authenticate, to sign in using magic links. So in this case, such user can provide email. Once this user obviously is registered in our platform, user can provide email, and then the magic link, the special link, is sent to the user's mailbox. User clicks it and is redirected to our application, and also the user is authenticated. So our application knows the identity of this user, who the person is, and this specific person can now start using our platform, our application. So this is why I decided to create this video, because I know that there can be a lot of confusion around the service called Azure Active Directory Business to Customer, so Azure AD B2C. And also I created this video to show you that building modern identity platform for B2C scenarios, so for customers, is not only about creating Azure Active Directory B2C service in the Azure Cloud, but you can leverage a bunch of other services available in the Azure Cloud to create such platform. Okay, so let's start. So first of all, before we dive into some theory and some facts, I would like to present the live demo. So the demo application I created. This application is integrated with Azure Active Directory B2C. This application is integrated with Azure AD Verifiable Credentials service, which I'm going to talk about in this video too. And in the end, this application, this solution presents how you can use such modern identity platform for B2C scenarios. So let me right now open this application and show you some of the features of this platform that I built. Here is my demo application, which I created using Blazor. But to be honest, it doesn't matter which kind of framework you choose to develop application, because you can integrate any kind of application and platform with Azure Active Directory B2C, so with this identity platform. So it can be Angular, it can be React, it can be desktop application, it can be mobile application like iOS, Android, whatever. Still, you can integrate this application with Azure Active Directory B2C. Okay, so this is my web application, and as you can see, it's hosted under such URL. And right now, before I sign in, I can try to open one of the tabs like user management or verifiable credentials. But you can see the information here that I have to authenticate first before I can access functionalities of this application. Which is obvious, because in a real-world scenario, typically you can have some functionalities that are available for unauthenticated users, for anonymous access, I would say, but some functionalities require authenticated user. And in this case, those two tabs are accessible only for authenticated users. So here in the top right corner, I have this login button. And if I will click it, I'm redirected to a login page provided by Azure Active Directory B2C service. You can see that the domain has changed. Right now it's login.techmindfactoryidentity.org. So it's very important to clarify, because many people are confused with this concept. Just to clarify that in this case, we are redirected from our web application to identity provider. So in this case, it's Azure AD B2C, but in any other scenarios, with any other identity providers, it's exactly the same like this here, yeah? So we are redirected directly to identity provider, and this is the place where we can provide credentials like username and password. So in this case, as you can see, this is the login page implemented using Azure Active Directory B2C. And the look and feel is aligned with my web application. So it's very important to mention that if I will get back to web app, you can see that there is this orange color and black color. And right now, if I'm redirected to the login page, I have my background related to my platform, my organization, my product. And I can customize this page. My logo is provided here, like TechMind Factory. I can adjust the colors, fonts, whatever. So it's very important to mention that you can align the look and feel of login registration pages, edit profile pages with your product. It's very important. So in the B2C world, it's very important to not confuse users with all those redirections and changing brandings. So in this case, you can fully align with the branding of your product in the B2C. So here, as you can see, I use my TechMind Factory branding. Okay, that's it. So right now, I can of course provide the username and password, but also I can create an account using Sign Up Now link, and this is the place where I can provide the email address. Then the verification code is sent to my mailbox. I have to provide this code on the policy here on this page. And once my email is confirmed, I can provide the new password. I have to confirm it, and then I can provide additional details related to my profile, like first name and last name. And here you can ask about additional properties of the user profile. Can we add more fields here? Of course we can. We can add drop-downs like please select your country, please select your age, provide first name, last name, provide username, and so on. we can fully customize it and extend the list of the claims which will be stored in the user profile. But I would like to really quickly underline one thing here. It's not a good idea to store any strict personal data, confidential data related to user profile, like, I don't know, passport number, ID number, and so on. All those details should not be directly stored in the Azure Active Directory B2C service. And this is also official recommendation from Microsoft. So if you have any scenarios where you would like to keep such data in the user profile, the better idea is to create account in the Azure Active Directory B2C for the user, but then collect additional profile details within the application and store it in your database, in your custom solution, outside of the Azure Active Directory B2C. So it's very important to mention that. The same is with consents. Like, for instance, if you would like to display different terms and conditions and ask users to accept them, it's better to implement such functionality within your application, again, outside from the Azure Active Directory B2C. And of course, you can ask, can we display the terms and conditions checkbox here on the sign up page with the link to terms and conditions? Of course, you can display such information. With Azure AD B2C, you can implement such terms and conditions checkbox. You can even implement versioning for those terms and conditions, and that user consented to specific version. But in general, Azure Active Directory B2C is not consent management system. And it's very important to remember that in the real-world scenarios, you should use some either third-party tools to manage consents or use your own solution. So Azure Active Directory B2C is not the right place to store consents. So again, such functionality should be implemented within the application, your platform. Okay, let me get back right now to the login page again. And of course, there is this another link, forgot your password. So if you forgot your password as a user, you can provide the email here. Again, the OTP code is sent to your mailbox. And then once you provide this OTP code, you can update your password, you can confirm it, and then use the new password to authenticate in the future. And of course, it's very important to mention that you can customize the look and feel of those emails that are sent to the users with those OTP codes. So by default, Azure AD B2C will send those emails using the default template, this blue template provided by Microsoft. But you can integrate third-party solutions like SendGrid, for instance, Twilio SendGrid, or Salesforce Marketing Cloud to send customized emails to users. So it's very important that it's also possible. So in this solution, I implemented such custom emails. Okay, so now if I get back to the login page again, of course, I can use my local account, so username and password to sign in. But as you can see, here is this Facebook button also available to users. So in this case, I can click sign in with Facebook. I'm redirected to Facebook platform. Here I can provide my username and password that I use in the Facebook. And then once I'm authenticated in Facebook, I'm redirected to the B2C, and B2C will redirect me to the web application that is secured by Azure Active Directory B2C. And it's very important to mention that you can integrate Azure Active Directory B2C service with multiple different identity providers, like social providers, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Gmail, and so on. So in this case, we talk about federation concept. So this trust relationship between Azure Active Directory B2C and other identity providers like Facebook, Google, or Twitter. So just one more thing, you can ask, if I use my Facebook account to authenticate and access application secured by Azure Active Directory B2C, does it mean that the information about the user profile is not stored in the Azure Active Directory B2C? The answer is no. Still in the Azure Active Directory B2C, there will be initial profile created for the user. The profile data will be taken from the Facebook, so we have this capability to decide which claims, which profile data will be taken from Facebook during this authentication. And then we will store information in the Azure Active Directory B2C that this specific user with this specific email is using Facebook to authenticate. So obviously we will not store Facebook password in the Azure Active Directory B2C, but still if we look into users directory in the B2C, we will see that this specific user is registered and this user uses Facebook account to authenticate. So just to avoid confusion, I wanted to clarify this. Okay, perfect. So the last thing here, the corporate account scenario. So there can be situations, and believe me, there are such situations, where even if you have B2C products and platforms where users can register and use their local accounts or social media accounts like Facebook or Twitter, there can be scenarios where you want to provide access also for the corporate users. So there can be a situation where you have Azure Active Directory tenant and you have Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. And again, you want to build this trust relationship between those tenants, those identity providers, and enable corporate users to use their accounts to sign in on the B2C login page to access application. And this is this scenario. If I will click TechMine Factory employee button, right now I'm redirected to the Azure Active Directory tenant. So it's this standard Azure AD tenant. And here I can use my employee account, organization account. And once I provide username and password, again, I'm redirected to the B2C, and B2C will automatically redirect me to the application. And again, you can ask, okay, so if I use my corporate account, does it mean that no details are stored in the Azure Active Directory B2C? Again, the answer is no. So still in the users directory, I will see this corporate account used by a specific user, but obviously we will not store any passwords in the Azure Active Directory B2C. Okay, perfect. So right now, let me really quickly authenticate. So I will provide my username and password. So once I'm authenticated, I'm redirected to my web application. We can see that here is this greeting, hello Daniel. And this information is taken from the ID token that was issued by Azure Active Directory B2C to this specific application after successful authentication. And right now, of course, I can log out and I can also click this edit profile button. Again, here I'm redirected to the edit profile page, again provided by Azure Active Directory B2C. So we can see that the URL is changed again to login.techminefactoryidentity.org. Here is my first name, here is my last name. I can update those details and then I can click continue and then I'm redirected back to my web application. Perfect. So right now, what I can do, I can access those functionalities in my application. So for instance, I can access this Verifiable Credentials tab. So right now I'm authenticated and I have full access to my product, my application. So let me open User Management tab. This is the place from which I can create user account in the Azure Active Directory B2C. And also this is the place where I can list all the users registered in the Azure Active Directory B2C service, B2C tenant. And you can ask, okay, Daniel, but I don't understand something here. So in a minute ago, you showed us that there is this sign up page, the login page, and so on. So user can create account and sign in, authenticate. And right now you're showing me that you are creating user accounts. So let me clarify on this. Everything is still valid. So in a typical scenario, there is this sign up page. User can create account on his own, on her own, and then user can authenticate. And everything is still valid. But there can be scenarios where you want to create user accounts programmatically. For instance, from one of the APIs you have in your platform. And one of the typical scenarios where we want to create users programmatically in the Azure Active Directory B2C is the migration scenario. So let's say that currently you have the platform, you have the product that is secured by another identity provider, like Auth0, let's say, and you would like to migrate to Azure Active Directory B2C. So in this case, you can create all the user accounts in the Azure Active Directory B2C programmatically, and then, for instance, send the link to the password reset page to those users, and they can update their password, and in the future, they can use B2C as an identity provider to access your platform. So in this case, you want to create those users programmatically. So in this case, just to clarify, with Azure AD B2C, you can create user accounts programmatically using Microsoft Graph API. So there is like a set of APIs within the Microsoft Graph API, which can be used to create user account, delete user account, update user account, enable user account, disable user account. So again, another scenario can be like this. One of the users did not use the platform, let's say for 3 months. So you want to disable user account, but you don't want to delete it from the Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. And again, you can do it programmatically. So you can have this automation, like a script API underneath that is running through the Azure Active Directory B2C or your database and disable all the user accounts that are inactive in your product. This is also possible. And after some time, you can enable user account again programmatically. Okay, and of course, underneath you can see that there is this list of the users in my Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. So again, programmatically, I have implemented this functionality. I can list all the users that are available in my Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. And of course, what I can do, I can create such a new user. So let me really quickly do it right now. Daniel, new, and let me type the password. I can click create. The user is created right now, and you can see that the record is visible on this list with users. And right now what I can do, I can also delete this user. Here is the confirmation. And once I click yes, the user is deleted from my Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. Perfect. So as I mentioned, it's very important to remember that you can manage users in the Azure Active Directory B2C programmatically using Microsoft Graph API. So now let me switch to Verifiable Credentials tab. And this is quite a new concept, which I will discuss in a few minutes in the presentation. But I would like to show you just a simple demo how you can leverage the centralized identity approach and verifiable credentials to issue credentials to users and then to verify them to avoid, for instance, using passwords. So right now, let me connect to my phone to mirror the screen and show you what is happening also in the Microsoft Authenticator app. Okay, so on the left side, we can see the screen mirroring from my phone. And this is Microsoft Authenticator app. And here you can see that I have this tab called Credentials. And this service is currently in the beta at the moment of recording this video. So to access it, first you can scan one of the verifiable credentials, and this tab then will be available to you. But what I would like to show you is how to generate verifiable credential that can be used in the future to verify the user identity without providing the password, for instance. So here in the web application, I will click Generate the Code. And right now the code is displayed on the screen, and there is this PIN which I have to provide together with with scanning the QR code. So right now on my mobile application, I will in the Microsoft Authenticator app, I scanned the QR code, and right now I have to provide this PIN that is displayed in the web application. Please also note that there is this techmindfactory.com domain verified. So it's like confirmation that this credential is from this specific organization. So it's connected to my domain. I can click next. And here is the verifiable credential that can be issued to specific user. So in this case, it will be issued to me. And this will prove that I am the member of TechMindFactory. And as I mentioned, we are going to talk about verifiable credentials later in this video, but I would like to show you the concept because it can be really helpful also in the B2C scenarios. So here I can click Add, and right after a few seconds, this verifiable credential lands in my wallet, which is Microsoft Authenticator app. I can click it right now. And as you can see here, there is this information description that use this verified credential to prove that you are a member of TechMindFactory. This is only the example. You can customize this description. But there is also information about the member name. So there is my first name, last name, the member identifier, and who issued this specific verifiable credential. So here is my domain, in this case, techmindfactory.com. And now you can ask, okay, but what is the source of this data? So in this specific scenario, all those details like first name, last name, member identifier, those details were taken from the ID token issued by the Azure Active Directory B2C. So that is why first I had to authenticate, and once I am authenticated, I can access verifiable credentials tab in this web application. I can scan the code, provide the PIN, and the verifiable credential is issued to me. And right now I can use this card, this verifiable credential, to prove my identity. So now, as you can see below, there is this tab called Verify Credential, this section. So if I will click it, again after a few seconds, the QR code is displayed, but this time without the PIN, because PIN is not required. And right now, what I can do, again, I can scan it in the Authenticator app. And as you can see, here is this information that new permission request was created. And right now, you can see that, again, I can display all the details in my verifiable credential, like description, member identifier, member name, and so on. And right now, I can decide whether I want to present this verifiable credential or not to verify myself. So if I will click Allow, right now, my verifiable credential is being verified. And after a successful verification, there is this confirmation. And if I will open the verifiable credential details under Activity tab, we can see to whom I presented this verifiable credential. So in the real-world scenario, you can try to imagine the situation where, let's say that there is like a pharmacy company, pharmacy store, online pharmacy store, and I can create my my patient account, of course using first name, last name, providing my ID card and whatever. And after that, this verifiable credential can be issued to me, and then I can buy medicaments without providing any ID cards, prescriptions, and so on. I can just present my verifiable credential. This pharmacy store can confirm that, yes, I'm really the patient, I'm registered, I have my verifiable credential, so I can purchase medicaments. This is, of course, one of the examples. We are going to talk about verifiable credentials during the presentation in this video. But yeah, I wanted to show you the concept because, as you can see, this is quite a new technology, and this is quite new approach to verifying identity. But still, it's very important to mention that it's expanding. There is adoption of this technology, and who knows, probably in the future, this will be one of the ways that customers can authenticate. And another example can be like, you can try to imagine the situation where you have different playgrounds for kids, and playgrounds and places where kids can play together, where parents can leave their children, and then they can go to shopping, and after some time they can pick up their kids. And in such situation, you can try to imagine the situation that before the parent can leave his or her child in such playground, a parent has to provide again ID, passport, or anything else to prove the identity, and all those details have to be saved in the system. And let's try to imagine that within the country you have multiple places like this for kids. Yes? So if you register in one place and you provide the ID card and all the details, personal ID details, such verifiable credential can be issued for you. You can put it in the wallet, in the Authenticator app, and then if you will go to another place, you can just scan the QR code, you can prove your identity, and you don't have to provide any personal data anymore, like ID cards, passports, and whatever it is. So that's another scenario. So I think that there will be scenarios, and there are scenarios where verifiable credentials can be helpful. Perfect. So right now it's time to get back to the presentation, talk about some theories, about some important details related to modern identity platform. But I wanted to start with the demo because I think that it's always better to see something in action and then discuss the implementation details and scenarios. Perfect. So now let's do a little bit of introduction to Azure Active Directory B2C. So Azure Active Directory Business to Customer is identity service available in the Azure cloud, and to be more specific, customer identity and access management solution capable of supporting millions of users and billions of authentications per day. As we saw in the demo, we can federate, so build this trust relationship between Azure AD B2C and other identity providers like Facebook in my demo. So in this case, we can enable access to our platforms or products using Azure AD B2C to make sure that only authenticated users can use different functionalities. And on the other side, we can provide different options to users, like they can create local account using username and password, but also they can use social accounts like Facebook, Twitter, Google, LinkedIn, or any other platform that supports OpenID Connect and SAML protocols. But also we can integrate Azure AD B2C with standard Azure AD, and we can enable this access to our platforms and products for corporate accounts. On the other side, we saw that there is this possibility to create user accounts programmatically in the Azure Active Directory B2C using Microsoft Graph. So we can manage those user accounts programmatically. We can create accounts, delete accounts, update accounts, enable accounts, disable accounts programmatically from our APIs using Microsoft Graph. And also we can monitor the solution. So in this presentation, I will also show you that using log analytics, we can, for instance, check how many users, how many active users are in our platform and use our platform. And on the other side, for instance, how many, let's say, how many problems there were when it comes to authentication process. So for instance, we can see information that specific user couldn't sign in because of the fact that he or she provided wrong credentials. And on the other side, I will talk about it in this video. Also, we can integrate this whole analytics platform with Microsoft Sentinel. So in this case, we can monitor our solution. We can make sure that once there is security incident, let's say that specific user authenticated in one location, and then suddenly we see that the same user account is used in another location. There is incident created in Azure Sentinel, and we can be immediately informed, and also such user account can be immediately blocked, again using this Microsoft Graph API. And of course, we can integrate Azure AD B2C with external systems. So again, during authentication process, for instance, we can call external service, we can get some data about the user, and then we can inject this data in the token, in the ID token to be more specific, that is returned to the application. And again, we can do exactly the same during the registration of the user. So let's say that during the registration, we want to pass some information to external system using the API, and then create user account in the B2C. It's also possible because Azure AD B2C can be integrated with REST APIs. And of course, when it comes to applications and when it comes to standards, Azure AD B2C supports OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, SAML protocols, standards. We can integrate Azure AD B2C with web applications, mobile applications. We can secure our APIs with Azure AD B2C. So it has everything what is required to build modern cloud products and applications. Okay, perfect. So as I mentioned at the beginning, when it comes to our products, our B2C applications, solutions, it's good to have like consistent UI, consistent branding, and the look and feel to avoid confusion. To avoid confusion where user is in our application and then user is redirected to the B2C, and there is different look and feel, different branding, and user is confused. So that is why Azure Active Directory B2C provides this option to customize the look and feel of login page, registration page, password reset page, and also to customize those emails with one-time codes that are sent to users. So those can be also customized. So in this case, using HTML and CSS files together with JavaScript, we can customize this user experience on the login page, registration page, and other pages provided by Azure Active Directory B2C. And it's very important to mention that because there can be a questions. Okay, what about the branding? What about the look and feel? So it's clear we can do it with Azure Active Directory B2C. When it comes to integration with Azure AD B2C, as I mentioned, it supports standards like OpenID Connect, OAuth 2, SAML, but also to make it easier, Microsoft provides this library called Microsoft Authentication Library for easy integration using modern protocols. And this library can be used with different platforms and frameworks. So there is MSL, it's called MSAL, Microsoft Authentication Library, as I mentioned before. And this library is available for Android, for iOS, for macOS, for Linux, for .NET apps, for Node.js apps, for Python apps, React apps, Angular apps. So in this case, it's really recommended to use this Microsoft Authentication Library when you can use it, because your life will be much easier. So it provides token caching, it provides methods to make it easier to call login page, registration page. So just to summarize, your life will be easier when you will use Microsoft Authentication Library when you integrate your platform with Azure Active Directory B2C. Another huge interesting topic is related to cost. So of course there is a cost behind using Azure Active Directory B2C identity service in the Azure cloud. So let's talk about some details. So I think that it's very important to clarify that first 50,000 monthly active users are free for both licenses available for Azure Active Directory B2C. So for Premium P1 and Premium P2. And let me clarify this concept of monthly active users. So monthly active user is a unique user that performs an authentication within a given month. So the cost of Azure Active Directory B2C is not calculated per authentication operation. And it's very important to avoid this confusion. So it doesn't matter how many authentication operations user will perform during 1 month. User is billed once being active. So in this case, I will display the table with the cost in a minute, but it's very important to mention that Azure AD B2C calculates the cost not per authentication operation count. It calculates cost basing on the monthly active users. So how many users are active within 1 month? So how many users performed at least 1 authentication within 1 month? And of course, this is the table that we will find in the official documentation and official website of the Azure AD B2C. So first, 50,000 monthly active users are for free for both licenses, so P1 and P2. But there is a cost when there is more than 50,000 monthly active users. And to make it easier to estimate this cost and show you something, I will avoid discussing this table here. I have 2 samples that I prepared to make it easier to understand the cost calculation. But before I will display it, just one additional thing here. There is a separate charge, a flat fee of 3 cents billed for each text message / phone based multi-factor authentication attempt. So it's very important to mention that if we enable MFA in the Azure AD B2C, because obviously it's there, it's available for us, there will be additional cost. And here you can ask, Daniel, to avoid the cost, can we use Authenticator app to avoid this cost generation related to MFA? Of course you can. You can also build your custom MFA solution if you want, because as I mentioned, Azure AD B2C supports this integration with REST APIs. Okay, so let's look at the sample calculation for 100,000 monthly active users for P1 license for the Azure Active Directory B2C. So we take the price of 1 monthly active user for the P1 license, and we multiply it by 100,000 users. So for 100,000 users, monthly active users in Azure Active Directory B2C for the P1 license, we are going to pay $325. Yeah? But, as I mentioned, first 50,000 users are for free. And this is important information because we are not going to pay $325. We will divide it per 2. Yeah? So in this case, we are going to pay finally $162.50. So it's very important to make a note that always first 50,000 monthly active users in the Azure Active Directory B2C are for free. So if you will make any calculation for your solution, please remember about this fact, because if you forget about it, the cost will be increased. And now let's do exactly the same calculation for 100,000 monthly active users for Azure Active Directory B2C, but when the P2 license is used. So again, we are taking the unit price for 1 monthly active user. We multiply it per 100,000 users. And right now we can see that the cost is $1,625. And again, because of the fact that first 50,000 monthly active users are for free, we divide this amount per 2, and the final cost of 100,000 users will be $812.50. And it's very important information, again, to remember that first 50,000 users, monthly active users in the Azure Active Directory B2C are for free. So this is the cost estimation for a P2 license in the Azure Active Directory B2C. Perfect. So that was about the Azure Active Directory B2C identity service. But in this video, we will talk about modern identity platform and also how it can be built using Azure Cloud Services. So if you think that Azure Active Directory B2C service is the only service that is available for building modern identity platform, I can truly say that unfortunately you are wrong. So as you remember, I mentioned about all those cases where, for instance, you want to migrate users, or you want to use magic links, or you want to customize emails that are sent to your users, or for instance, you would like to call external system during sign-in, sign-up process, and so on. So when we talk about building modern identity platform or on the Azure Cloud, we talk obviously about Azure Active Directory B2C, which is the, I would say, heart of the whole solution, but also we can leverage all other services available in the Azure Cloud to build such modern identity platform. So let me show you the solution architecture diagram. As you can see here, of course, B2C, Azure Active Directory B2C service is used there, but there is a whole bunch of other services available in the Azure Cloud. So in this case, as I mentioned before, if you want to truly build modern identity platform for your applications, platforms, for B2C scenarios, you can leverage other Azure services too. Let me put some examples here to clarify what's happening when it comes to this architecture. And of course, in details, we are going to discuss responsibilities of each service that is used here. But of course, I don't have to say that security is very important here. That is why you can see virtual network on this diagram, private links that are used for PaaS services like Azure Functions and Azure Web Apps. And you can see private DNS zones because of the fact that everything is hidden within a virtual network available in the Azure Cloud. And now, when it comes to scenarios like, let's say, magic links, so we want to enable authentication using magic links in the B2C, we have to somehow send this email to the user with this magic link. We have to somehow customize the look and feel of this specific email, and then we have to validate somehow this magic link. So in this case, as you can see on this diagram, there is this magic links function app, which is responsible for sending magic links to users. So if you want to support such functionality in your modern identity platform, you can leverage Azure Functions, which is perfectly fine, and this is like a perfect match for these kinds of scenarios because of the fact that Azure Functions are cheap. This is serverless approach. So in this case, we can build this event-driven architecture. Yeah. So once the user, for instance, is registered, then we will send the magic link to such a user. Or once user selected to use magic links authentication, then B2C will call this magic links function app to send this magic link to the user mailbox. On the other side, I mentioned that there is this option to programmatically manage user accounts in the Azure Active Directory B2C. So to create user account, delete it, enable it, disable it, modify attributes of the user profile. So again, with Azure Functions and Microsoft Graph API, we can easily build such functionalities. So if you have multiple applications within your B2C platform for your customers, you can build such layer of APIs to make sure that, for instance, you can programmatically create user account in the B2C. Or if you have migration scenario in which you would like to migrate users from the existing identity provider to the Azure Active Directory B2C using Azure Functions and Microsoft Graph API is the perfect match here. And of course, you can see these live notifications function up together with Sentinel service. This one, for instance, is used to send these live notifications to the web application once the verifiable credential is verified, is presented successfully. Yeah, so like there is a bunch of functionalities that can be implemented using those services in the Azure cloud. On the other side, as I mentioned, you can adjust the look and feel of this sign-in page, registration page in the B2C and other pages. And to host HTML and CSS files somewhere, you can use Azure Storage Account, for instance. So it's here on this diagram connected with the Azure AD B2C tenant. In this case, I can store all those HTML, CSS files on the storage account, reference them in the Azure AD B2C custom policies, and in the end, I will have the great look and feel aligned with my branding in my application or product. On the other side, I mentioned that you can send customized emails to users with one-time with these OTP codes, yeah, to confirm the email. So in this case, you can integrate Azure Active Directory B2C with SendGrid, and in the SendGrid service, you can keep the email templates, and then those emails sent by B2C will be customized, and again, the look and feel will be aligned with your platform. And there are some other services here, like services responsible for monitoring your identity solution. So there is Log Analytics Workspace, Azure Monitor, Application Insights. On the other side, when it comes to all the credentials and certificates, we can securely store them in the Azure Key Vault. And obviously, we can use Azure, and now it's called, at the moment of recording this video, it will be called Microsoft Sentinel. So we can detect security incidents in our platform, and for instance, we can quickly block user account. And on the other side, when it comes to those different APIs, access to them can be restricted through the Azure API Management Service. So in this case, you cannot call them directly, those APIs. You have to obtain the subscription key from the API management, and then you will be able to call them. And of course, you can ask about the front door here. Again, if we want to use Azure AD B2C, we can use it using the custom domain. So as you can see, as you remember, I used this login.techmindfactoryidentity.org URL when the user was redirected to the login page. So this custom domain can be implemented in the Azure AD B2C using Azure Front Door. And obviously, we can secure Azure API Management Service with the front door with enabled web application firewall to make sure that all those APIs are secured in a proper way. And there is also this Verifiable Credentials service. So this one can be configured in Azure Cloud. There is also Azure Web App to host this Verifiable Credentials API to make sure that I can display those verifiable credentials and verify them in the web application. So as you can see, we talk about Azure AD B2C service, but when we talk about building modern identity platform, this is the architecture. So there is a bunch of different Azure services that you can use to build your modern identity platform for customers to secure your products and applications. And now let's talk a little bit about architecture components and their responsibilities. I know that I describe it somehow and I talk about different scenarios, but just to avoid confusion, let's talk about them right now. So Azure Front Door is used to enable custom domain for Azure AD B2C service, as I mentioned, and to secure access to the APIs using Web Application Firewall. When it comes to Azure Storage Account, as I mentioned, it is used to host custom branding for Azure Active Directory B2C. So all those HTML, CSS files are stored there to enable this great look and feel of sign-in, sign-up pages displayed by Azure Active Directory B2C. Azure Application Insights is used to monitor Azure functions and APIs and detect issues. So in this case, we can easily detect issues in our source code that we implemented for modern identity platform. Log Analytics, on the other side, is used to monitor Azure Active Directory tenant. So in this case, we can see, for instance, how many active users we have in our platform, which sign-in pages are used most often, or we can see the issues related to authentication for specific users. So it's really helpful because we have this observability of our identity platform with Log Analytics enabled for Azure Active Directory B2C. Azure Functions, of course, as I mentioned, is the perfect match here for the serverless scenarios and event-driven scenarios. So functions are used to enable creating users programmatically in the Azure Active Directory B2C, generating magic links, and also Azure Functions are used to handle all those events related to verifiable credentials, issuance, and verification. Verifiable Credentials service is used to issue and verify credentials. So this is what I showed you in the Microsoft Authenticator app. And this is very important to be mentioned, that once this verifiable credential is issued, then you can use it to present and to prove your identity in other products. So if you have multiple products in your platform, in your solution, you can leverage verifiable credentials to prove users' identity. SignalR service is used to send real-time notifications to web application from Verifiable Credentials Service API. So in this case, once the verifiable credential is scanned, we want to display this real-time notification in the web application. Azure Key Vault is used to store secrets and certificates. As I mentioned, I used custom domain for my Azure AD B2C. The same approach is used for Azure API Management Service, so I'm using custom domain there. So that is why I need to have my own certificates, and those certificates are kept in the Azure Key Vault. Azure API Management is like a gateway to provide access to my all APIs for my modern identity platform. So without registering and obtaining the subscription key, you will not be able to call any of those functions. If you will try, the access is restricted, and also you cannot call Azure Functions directly because of the fact that they are secured by Azure Private Link. They are integrated with the virtual network in the Azure cloud, so the access to Azure Functions is available only through Azure API Management Service, which is also integrated with virtual network using external mode. Okay, so this is about the general architecture, about the components, but again, you can ask about the cost. So what is the cost of such modern identity platform solution? So this is the approximate cost. So between $2,900 up to $3,250. And now, you can ask what implicates such cost. So it depends which tiers will be selected for specific Azure services. So example, Azure Functions can be used with consumption plan instead of premium plan. Obviously, then if you decide to use consumption plan, you will not be able to integrate functions with a virtual network using private links. On the other side, you can decide to host some functions on the same premium plan. So you can have separate premium plans for those functions, or you can use one plan for all of them. It's architectural decision, but still from the cost perspective, you can discuss it. But it's very important to mention that, yeah, as I mentioned before, you can select different tiers for those services. Exactly the same is for the Azure API Management Service. If you want to integrate it with the Azure Virtual Network, you have to select the premium plan, which is quite costly for API management. But of course, if you don't want to use Virtual Network, which I strongly recommend to use, you can use the standard plan for Azure API management. So to summarize, each architecture decision implicates cost change and discussion about security. Yeah, so it's always like this, it depends. but I wanted to show you this approximate cost for you to know, to remember, and to have the details. Okay, great. So another topic I would like to discuss here is DevOps. So there is this approach to automate everything. And if you think about identity platforms, for many of people, it's hard to imagine that still you can automate something, you can write scripts, you can automate deployments and so on, because of the fact that this is about the identity. But right now, after we saw the architecture of this modern identity platform, now you can see that there is a lot of different things that can be automated, like deployment of those architecture components using ARM templates, or deployment of the code for function apps, or for the code for Verifiable Credentials API, or even deploying the custom policies to the B2C, or deploying those HTML and CSS files. So in this case, what I can truly say, you can still use DevOps practices to manage your modern identity platform and to automate things. So in this case, in this specific scenario, I used GitHub for my modern identity platform implementation, but I want to clarify this. You don't have to use GitHub. You can use Azure DevOps. You can use any other platforms for this automation. I use GitHub because I wanted to test some features, and I can truly say that it was quite easy to implement this automation. So when it comes to DevOps, as I mentioned, I use GitHub, and for this solution, I automated like deployment of custom policies in the Azure Active Directory B2C because I use Identity Experience Framework. So I implement those authentication flows using XML files, so custom policies. I automated deployment of Azure AD B2C branding files, so those HTML and CSS files. I automated deployment of the source code of, so to be more specific, packages for Azure functions. So all those functions like user management functions, magic links functions, and so on. All those functions are deployed automatically using GitHub. And of course, I use it for web APIs. So the Verifiable Credentials API, for instance, is deployed automatically using GitHub. So this is an example of the GitHub Actions workflow for my Azure Active Directory B2C policies and branding files. So first, I deploy custom policies to Azure Active Directory B2C. Yes, again, you can use Azure CLI and PowerShell to deploy those custom policies. I used PowerShell in this case. And when it comes to branding files, I used Azure CLI commands to deploy, to push those HTML, CSS files to storage account to specific container that is available for B2C. I did exactly the same for Azure Functions and APIs. So in this case, I'm building the source code, then I'm deploying it. And the last step here is the cleaning the working directory. So a little bit of explanation here. When you use Azure Virtual Network and you use private links for your function apps, you cannot access them directly anymore. So this is, again, architectural decision, but please keep in mind that in such scenarios, you will have to use self-hosted agents and self-hosted runners, as they called on GitHub platform. So in this case, I created a virtual machine in Azure Cloud that is integrated with my virtual network, where I have other modern identity platform components, and GitHub is connected to this virtual machine. I'm building packages with my function apps and APIs there on this virtual machine. From this virtual machine, I'm doing deployment to Azure components, and in the end, I'm cleaning up a working directory on this virtual machine. And when it comes to demo web application, this one is deployed directly because I did not integrate it with virtual network. This is only the demo application. So in this case, you can see the two steps. I'm building the package and deploying it directly from GitHub. And this is the deployment automation diagram. to make it really simple, as you can see, I can create new branch. In my Git repository, I can work on the code. Then there is a code review. I can merge those changes to the develop branch, master branch. It depends how many environments you would like to support. And then GitHub Actions workflow is triggered. I'm building those packages. I'm deploying them to the Azure Cloud Services. And then I can start using the platform. So everything is automated. Everything what can be automated is automated in this modern identity platform. So as I mentioned, custom policies, branding files for B2C, this can be automated. Function apps, web APIs, and other things also can be implemented, including creation of those components using ARM templates. Okay, great. So another important topic, monitoring and security. So as I mentioned, you can integrate log analytics service with Azure Active Directory B2C. And to make it easier, I generated a few print screens from my current modern identity platform I developed in Azure Cloud. And as you can see here, you can access this analytics data about your users and about incidents. So let's talk about user insights. Once you integrate log analytics with Azure Active Directory B2C, you have these insights about authentications. So for instance, you can see in which applications there is the biggest amount of authentications. So if you're building the platform with multiple web applications, those web applications will be registered in the Azure Active Directory B2C tenant, and in each application will have its own client ID. Yeah, it's quite obvious. And then you can check in the authentications tab here in this workbook how many authentications per application were performed. And just to make it clear, you do not have to use Microsoft Sentinel. You can only use Log Analytics Workspace. You can integrate this with Azure AD B2C. The link to the documentation will be provided in this video description. And once you connect Log Analytics with Azure AD B2C, you have access to such insights. And when it comes to the workbooks, they are available on GitHub. The link will be also provided in the video description. And again, you can see, for instance, authentications per identity provider. So you can see that the most often users use their local accounts to sign in, but there is one authentication using Facebook. And also you can see authentications per policy. So you can see that sign up, sign in policy is used the most often, but there is also profile edit policy and sign in with magic links policy, for instance. So you can check which method is used by users the most often. But as I mentioned, there is this option to integrate Log Analytics plus Microsoft Sentinel for your modern identity platform with Azure Active Directory B2C. So when you integrate Log Analytics Workspace, as I mentioned, you have all those details about authentications, authentications per identity provider, per application, per policy, but also you have this information about failed sign-ins, failed registrations, about successful sign-ins, and so on. So all those informations, all this information is kept in the Log Analytics Workspace. And exactly the same information is stored for risky users. So for incidents, yeah? So let me put an example. If one user authenticates in one location and after a few seconds the same user account is used in another location, then it's detected by Azure Active Directory B2C once risky users functionality is enabled. And this information is stored in the Log Analytics Workspace. So in this case, you can see, for instance, that I have 3 risky users in Netherlands. And in this case, this risky user can be easily identified using the identifier like email and user ID in the Azure Active Directory B2C, and then we can take up some actions. But of course, if we use log analytics with Azure AD B2C, we have to make some steps manually. Yeah? So obviously we will see information that there is a risky user detected, but let's say that we want to automate the process of blocking the account of the user account when the problem with authentication is detected. Yeah? So in this case, we can use Microsoft Sentinel with log analytics connected to Azure Active Directory B2C service. And in this case, what we can do, we can monitor our identity solution. We can display incidents related to user accounts, authentications, and so on, and we can react. So as you can see, here is the example of incident that is displayed in the Azure Sentinel that is connected to my log analytics workspace connected to Azure Active Directory B2C service. And here we can see that tactics and techniques is credential access. And we can see that risky user is detected in the Azure Active Directory B2C. And basing on that information, what I can do, I can trigger action. So for instance, I can block user account automatically once such incident is generated in the Microsoft Sentinel. So now let me sign in to Azure portal and show you some of the details I just described when it comes to monitoring and security. Let me start with log analytics workbooks, and let me start with the general one, so Azure AD B2C dashboard. So this is the dashboard I created to monitor my modern identity platform. And when it comes to this workbook, it's available on GitHub, and the link will be provided in the video description. So right now, as you can see, there are two tabs, User Insights and Authentications. So as I mentioned, this is the place where I can check all the details related to authentications in the Azure Active Directory B2C. So as you can see, I can see the browsers like Chrome, Edge, Firefox used for authentication. I can see the IP addresses, the user names used, and also if I scroll down, I can see the locations where authentication operations were performed. So in this case, United States, Netherlands, and Poland. So it can be really helpful from the insights perspective. When I switch to Authentications tab on the other side, this is the view I showed you in the presentation. So I can see authentications per application, authentications per identity provider, per policy, and also failure reasons like invalid username or password or something else. Yeah. So in this case, I again can quickly discover those insights and help my users, for instance, when there is information that user cannot sign in. Okay, I have this another workbook here called Risky Users, and this is the workbook I use to see all the risky users from different locations. So we can see that there were 9 authentication attempts in Netherlands and 3 in the United States. And if I scroll down here, I have information about those events, including IP addresses and locations and coordinates. So I can easily create another dashboards, and I can analyze what happened, which user account is compromised, and whether I should disable it or not. And all those informations, all those details included here are helpful. But as I mentioned, with this monitoring solution, you can also use Microsoft Sentinel. Microsoft Sentinel is security information and event management platform that you can use to monitor different security events and incidents in different Azure services. But of course, Sentinel can be used with other platforms, not only with Azure. So this is like a small disclaimer. But in this case, I connected Microsoft Sentinel to the log analytics workspace that is connected to my Azure AD B2C tenant. And after I did it, Now I can see all the logs from this log analytics workspace, like information about usage, about the audit logs, signing logs, and so on. But also I have this information about recent incidents, so about risky users detected. So if I click one of the incidents here, you can see that I have this information that risky user was detected in the Azure Active Directory B2C. So it's credential access. And basing on this incident, once it's detected, I can prepare a specific playbook. So in this case, I can perform a specific actions once specific incident is detected. So in this specific scenario, what I could implement is the mechanism to automatically block user account once it was compromised. And then, for instance, I could send email to the platform administrator about this fact. So it's really helpful because with Microsoft Sentinel here, I can really quickly review security incidents in my identity platform. And also I can decide about the next steps, about the actions which will be performed once the security incident occurs. Okay, perfect. So that was like a small overview, but I want you to remember and know that even if you use Azure Active Directory B2C, and you can think about this like identity service in the cloud, and probably there is no API and so on, still you can access it programmatically using Microsoft Graph, and still you can monitor this platform because of the fact that you can connect Log Analytics Workspace to Azure Active Directory B2C. And in the end, you can use Microsoft Sentinel because you can connect Microsoft Sentinel to Log Analytics Workspace that is connected with Azure Active Directory B2C service. Perfect. So let's get back to the presentation. The last topic, verifiable credentials. I will not talk about technical details behind this concept, but I'm providing the link in this video description to my another video where I describe some concepts, technical details, and scenarios. I'm mentioning verifiable credentials in the context of modern identity platform for customers because I personally think that this technology will be the important part of digital identity world and B2C scenarios. So this is why I would like to first start with verifiable credentials B2C use cases. So start with the scenarios and then talk a little bit about the technology and technical details. So one of the scenarios can be related to online learning platform. So in this specific scenario, we can reliably identify participants during future exams. So without the need to present the ID card and issue certification confirmation. So probably you are familiar with Microsoft certifications if you are a Microsoft developer or Microsoft specialist. So if you want to pass the exam and you register in the person view, for instance, before the exam, you have to provide either the photo of your passport or ID card or driving license, as far as I remember. Yes, so there is this process of verification, and you have to do it every time you want to pass the exam and you want to start the exam. But try to imagine the situation where you have to provide your passport photo only once. Then the verifiable credentials is issued to you. You got it in your wallet, so in the Microsoft Authenticator app. And then if you want to access and pass any other exams in the future, instead of scanning the passport and uploading the photo of it, you have to just present your verifiable credential after scanning the code that was presented by online learning platform, and then your identity is confirmed. This could be, in my opinion, quite interesting approach, and I think that this can be one of the scenarios that will be implemented in the future in the B2C scenarios. Another example where verifiable credentials can be used is online pharmacy. So in this case, we can include a certificate about the physician that issued the prescription during the purchase. So this is the example I mentioned before in this video, where, for instance, you can either verify physician identity or patient identity. So once you are a member of the medical center, let's say, and this medical center also owns the pharmacy store, once your visit to the doctor is completed, you got your prescription, you can go to the pharmacy store, and besides showing like the paper prescription or anything else, you can just present the verifiable credential. And the information about the medicaments can be included there. So this can be another potential scenario where verifiable credentials technology can be used. The last one, so-called reuse know your customer. So in this scenario, organization asks to provide two forms of possible sources to confirm user identity, a so-called know your customer. In this case, verifiable credential can be presented. And as you remember, I mentioned those playgrounds, those places where kids can play. So once you verify your identity as a customer, if you go to any other place, you can verify your identity as a customer using verifiable credentials instead of showing, for instance, an ID card. Okay, great. So when it comes to verifiable credentials and the centralized identity concept, it's not only about Microsoft and it's not Microsoft's technology. Yes, so just to make it clear, there are multiple implementations of this standard, this technology. So it's exactly the same situation like with OpenID and OAuth 2 protocols. You can use Azure AD B2C, you can use Azure AD, you can use Auth0, Curity, and some other identity providers, but standards stay the same. And we have exactly the same situation here. So Microsoft implemented verifiable credentials. It's called Azure AD Verifiable Credentials. So we have the issuer interface. So this is the Azure portal where you can configure the service, where you can configure verifiable credentials, access configuration, change configuration, and so on. On other side, there are developer tools like SDK plus API. So in this case, at the moment of recording this video, Microsoft extended API for verifiable credentials. So right now you can use verifiable credentials API with many frameworks, many applications. So if you build your backend application with .NET or with Node, it doesn't matter because still you can leverage REST API that is provided together with verifiable credentials. And also when it comes to those JSON files, so how these verifiable credentials will be presented in the wallet, how the look and feel will look like. You can define it using JSON files. Here you can modify those JSON files using VS Code, for instance. And in the end, we have this user wallet, so Microsoft Authenticator app. This is the place where you can see the issued verifiable credentials. And of course, you can use Authenticator app to present your verifiable credentials to some of the platforms you want to have access to. Okay, so last thing when it comes to verifiable credentials, again, to avoid confusion, verifiable credentials can be integrated with any other identity provider other than Azure AD. So I know that it's called Azure AD Verifiable Credentials. You create this service in the Azure portal. Azure AD is required, but still to use Azure AD Verifiable Credentials, you can use any other identity provider. So you can use other identity providers together with verifiable credentials. So let me put an example. In my solution, you saw that I authenticated using my account registered in the Azure AD B2C, and B2C redirected me to the web application with the ID token, and I was successfully authenticated. and in the ID token there was information about my profile, like this identifier, first name, last name, and so on. So I can now take this information from the ID token and inject this in the verifiable credential, and this information will be stored there. But of course, if my web application was secured by Auth0, Okta, Curity, or any other identity provider, still I can generate a verifiable credential using the information provided from the other identity providers that I use to integrate my solution. So it's very important to underline this, because there is a lot of confusion and people think that Azure AD Verifiable Credentials can be used only with Azure AD or Azure AD B2C, which is not the truth. And this is it. I hope you found this video interesting and helpful. If you still have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me either on Twitter or LinkedIn. I also encourage you to visit my blog under techmindfactory.com. Please also subscribe to this channel, because in the future I plan to release more videos. Thank you so much for watching.